Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them right now. Officer Daniel Reeves' voice cracked through the rain like a siren, sharp enough to make every porch light on Linden Street flicker with tension. Naomi Brooks froze beside her car, one grocery bag hanging from her wrist, raindrops sliding down the sleeve of her dark blue hospital scrubs. The wet asphalt reflected the spinning red and blue lights across the quiet Baltimore neighborhood, turning the puddles at her feet into streaks of broken color. A gallon of milk tipped sideways near the curb. A can of tomato soup rolled slowly through the gutter before stopping against the boot of a man sitting beneath the awning of a closed liquor store across the street. He didn't move. Neither did the large black and tan German shepherd resting beside him. Naomi's chest rose carefully as she tried to steady her breathing. 14 hours in the ER had already drained the strength from her body, and now the cold rain soaked through her scrubs, clinging to her skin like ice water. "Officer, I live here," she said quietly. "I just came home from work." Reeves stepped closer anyway, one hand resting near his belt as if her exhaustion itself looked suspicious to him. Tall, white, broad-shouldered, with water dripping from the brim of his patrol cap, he scanned her like he had already decided the story before hearing a word. "Funny," he muttered. "We got reports about someone matching your description looking into vehicles." Naomi blinked slowly. Her fingers tightened around the grocery bag handles. "Matching my description?" she repeated. Reeves tilted his head. "Black female. Mid-30s. Gray sedan." He glanced at her car parked beside the curb. "That enough details for you?" The words hung there ugly and cold. Upstairs windows shifted open along the block. Curtains moved. People watched but stayed silent. That was how Linden Street survived moments like this. Quiet. Careful. Invisible. Naomi swallowed the knot rising in her throat and looked toward the brick row house behind her, the porch light glowing soft amber through the rain. Her mother was probably inside waiting for insulin and dinner, unaware that her daughter was standing in the street being treated like a criminal 10 feet from home. "You ran my plates already," Naomi said, her voice calm but tired. "So you know this address belongs to me." Reeves' jaw tightened slightly. "Don't tell me how to do my job." Across the street, the German shepherd's ears lifted. The animal watched without blinking, muscles suddenly alert beneath rain-dark fur. The man beside him remained seated beneath the awning, hood pulled low over his face, one gloved hand resting loosely against the dog's neck. Naomi noticed him only for a second before Reeves stepped closer again. "Set the bags down," he ordered. Slowly, one of the plastic bags slipped from Naomi's fingers as she bent carefully toward the pavement. An orange rolled free, bouncing once before stopping near the edge of the sidewalk. Rainwater streamed through her braids and down the side of her face. Her shoulders ached from exhaustion, but something deeper hurt worse now. The humiliation of being questioned like she didn't belong in the neighborhood where she grew up. "You know what's crazy?" Naomi said softly without looking up. Reeves frowned. "What?" She straightened slowly, rain dripping from her chin. "Every single time somebody calls about a suspicious person around here, it somehow ends up being someone who looks like me." The silence that followed felt heavier than the storm itself. Reeves' expression hardened instantly. "Careful," he warned. "You don't want to make this difficult." Naomi looked him directly in the eyes then, tired but steady. "No, officer," she replied quietly. "You're the one making it difficult." Somewhere across the street, metal tags clinked softly beneath the liquor store awning. The German shepherd rose to its feet. The dog stood completely still now, rain sliding off the thick lines of his back, while his dark eyes locked onto Officer Reeves with quiet intensity. Naomi noticed the shift immediately. Animals always sensed tension before people admitted it existed. Across Linden Street, the man beneath the awning slowly reached down and rested a steady hand against the German shepherd's shoulder, but he still did not interfere. He simply watched. Reeves glanced briefly toward them before returning his attention to Naomi. "You want to keep talking back?" he asked. "Because I can make this night a lot harder than it needs to be." Naomi felt something twist painfully in her chest. Not fear exactly, but exhaustion. The kind that came from years of explaining herself to people who had already decided who she was. Her hospital badge swung lightly against her soaked scrubs as the wind pushed through the narrow row houses. St. Agnes Medical Center. Registered nurse. 12 years. None of it seemed to matter beneath flashing patrol lights. "I am not talking back," she said carefully. I am asking why you stopped me. Reeves gave a short, humorless laugh. You people always say that. The words landed harder than the cold rain. A woman standing on a nearby porch lowered her eyes immediately. An older man across the street quietly pulled out his phone, but kept it low against his jacket. Nobody moved closer. Nobody ever did. Naomi bent slowly to pick up the orange near her shoe before it rolled into the storm drain. Her fingers shook slightly from the cold. Or maybe from anger. She was not even sure anymore. 40 minutes earlier, she had been helping stabilize a teenager after a car accident downtown. Before that, she had spent nearly 3 hours comforting an elderly veteran struggling to breathe through advanced heart failure. She had walked out of the hospital carrying the weight of other people's pain like she always did. And now she stood in her own neighborhood being treated like a threat for carrying groceries home to her mother. The porch light behind her flicked suddenly brighter as the front door opened. Naomi, her mother's voice called weakly through the rain. Naomi closed her eyes for half a second. Stay inside, Mama. But Evelyn Brooks was already stepping carefully onto the porch wrapped in a pale gray cardigan, one hand gripping the railing for balance. Even from the sidewalk, Naomi could see the worry written across her tired face. Diabetes and arthritis had slowed her down these past few years, but she still carried herself with quiet dignity. Reeves turned toward the porch. Ma'am, go back inside. Evelyn frowned. That is my daughter. Naomi could hear the strain in her mother's breathing beneath the storm. The insulin needed refrigeration. The groceries were still sitting in puddles beside the curb. Milk, bread, soup, medication. Normal things suddenly made to look suspicious under police lights. Across the street, the man under the awning finally stood up fully. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, wearing a faded dark hoodie beneath an old canvas jacket soaked dark with rain. The German Shepherd rose beside him in perfect silence. The movement caught Reeves' attention immediately. Stay where you are, Reeves barked toward him. The man stopped without argument. Calm, controlled. One hand remained loosely at his side, while the other rested near the dog's harness. Naomi noticed military posture instantly. Straight spine, balanced stance. The kind of stillness people carried only after years of discipline. The dog tags hanging beneath his hoodie caught the streetlight for half a second before disappearing again. Reeves narrowed his eyes. This does not concern you. The stranger nodded once. Then maybe stop making it everybody's problem. His voice was low and even, but something about it shifted the air on the entire block. The German Shepherd remained beside him, ears forward, watching every movement Reeves made with absolute focus. Rain hammered softly against the parked cars lining Linden Street, while the silence between Officer Reeves and the stranger stretched tighter with every passing second. Naomi could feel the tension settling over the block like heavy fog. Reeves shifted his stance slightly, his hand still near his belt, eyes narrowing beneath the flashing patrol lights. I said stay out of it, he repeated. The man beside the German Shepherd did not move closer. He simply looked at Naomi for a brief moment, then at the groceries scattered across the wet pavement. Milk leaking slowly near the curb, bread soaking through thin plastic, medication sitting inches from dirty rainwater. Ordinary things turned into evidence by suspicion alone. Looks to me like a tired nurse trying to get home, the stranger said calmly. Reeves gave a short laugh. And you know that because? Naomi lifted her hospital badge silently. The stranger nodded once. Because I can read. A few quiet chuckles escaped from somewhere behind a nearby porch screen before disappearing just as quickly. Reeves' jaw flexed. He did not like losing control of an audience. Naomi noticed it immediately. Some officers came into neighborhoods carrying authority. Reeves carried performance. Every movement felt designed to remind people who held power. You live around here? Reeves asked the stranger sharply. Sometimes. That is not an answer. It is tonight. The German Shepherd remained perfectly still beside him, rain dripping steadily from the tactical harness wrapped around the dog's chest. Naomi noticed a faded American flag patch sewn near the strap. Military issue. The dog's posture never changed. Focused. Trained. Controlled. Reeves noticed it too. What is with the dog? The stranger scratched lightly behind the shepherd's ear. Retired working dog. Reeves scoffed. You military? The man paused for half a second before answering. Used to be. Naomi studied him more carefully now beneath the flickering streetlight. Mid-40s maybe. Deep scar running near his jawline. Broad hands roughened with old calluses. Even standing still, he carried the alertness of someone who had spent years expecting danger before it arrived. The kind of awareness that never fully left people after war. Evelyn Brooks stepped farther onto the porch despite the cold. "Naomi, baby, come inside," she called softly. Naomi looked toward her mother and forced a reassuring smile she did not fully feel. "I am okay, Mama." Reeves glanced toward the porch again, visibly irritated by the growing attention from neighbors. More lights had turned on now up and down the block. Faces lingered behind windows. Phones glowed faintly in the dark. The neighborhood had learned to watch quietly. "Let me make this simple," Reeves said, turning back toward Naomi. "I asked a few questions. Instead of cooperating, you decided to get smart." Naomi stared at him in disbelief. "I told you my name. I showed you where I work. I told you this is my home." Reeves stepped closer. "And I decide what counts as cooperation." The rain intensified suddenly, drumming against rooftops and patrol lights. Across the street, the German shepherd lifted his head slightly higher. The stranger's eyes followed Reeves carefully now, not aggressive, not emotional, just observant in a way that made Naomi uneasy and strangely comforted at the same time. Then Reeves looked directly at the man again. "You got a name?" A pause. "Marcus Kane." Something flickered briefly across Reeves' face. Recognition, maybe. Small but real. "Kane," he repeated slowly. Marcus nodded once. "That is right." Reeves studied him harder now beneath the storm and spinning lights. Then his eyes dropped toward the dog tags hanging partially visible beneath Marcus' hoodie. The expression on his face changed almost imperceptibly. Not fear. Not yet. But uncertainty had finally entered the conversation. Officer Reeves stared at Marcus Kane a moment longer while rainwater dripped from the edge of his patrol cap onto the front of his uniform. The uncertainty in his face lasted only a second before pride covered it again. "You know this woman?" he asked sharply. Marcus glanced toward Naomi, then toward Evelyn standing on the porch beneath the trembling amber light. "No," he answered calmly. "But I know what tired looks like. I know what fear looks like too." Naomi felt the words settle heavily in the cold air. Reeves crossed his arms. "Nobody here is afraid." Across the block, a porch door creaked softly open. An elderly man stepped halfway outside holding a coffee mug against his chest, watching carefully from beneath the glow of his kitchen light. Somewhere farther down the street, a child pulled back a curtain just enough for wide eyes to peek through. Linden Street had become very still. Marcus lowered his eyes briefly toward the scattered groceries beside the curb. "Then why does everybody keep watching like they already know how this ends?" Reeves' jaw tightened hard enough for Naomi to notice even from several feet away. The German shepherd remained silent beside Marcus, but his posture had changed again. More alert now, focused entirely on the officer. Naomi had worked around trauma patients long enough to recognize stress in living things. The dogs sensed escalation before voices ever rose. Reeves pointed toward the shepherd. "You need to control your animal." Marcus gave a slight nod. "Rex is under control." "That sounds like a threat." "No," Marcus replied evenly. "That sounds like experience." Rain rolled steadily down Naomi's face as exhaustion pressed deeper into her shoulders. Her shoes were soaked through completely now. She looked at the ruined groceries near her feet and suddenly felt something inside her crack open. Not dramatically, not loudly, just the quiet breaking point that came after too many years of swallowing humiliation to survive another day. "You know what?" she said softly. Reeves looked at her immediately. Naomi straightened despite the cold and met his eyes without hesitation. "You do not get to humiliate me because you wear a badge." The words hit the street harder than thunder. Reeves blinked once, visibly stunned that she had said it out loud. Naomi's voice never rose, but the calmness inside it carried more weight than anger could have. "I worked 14 hours today helping strangers stay alive," she continued. "I came home with groceries and medication for my mother. And somehow you still looked at me and saw a problem first." Evelyn pressed one trembling hand against the porch railing, tears glistening in her tired eyes. Reeves stepped forward quickly. "Watch your tone." But Naomi did not step back this time. "No," she replied quietly. "You watch yours." The silence afterward felt enormous. Rain tapping rooftops. Patrol lights flashing red across wet brick walls. The faint buzz of electricity from old street lamps overhead. Marcus said nothing. He simply observed. Naomi noticed him glance briefly toward Reeves' right hand near his belt, then toward Rex, whose ears had gone rigid beneath the storm. Something invisible shifted again. Reeves looked around suddenly, realizing how many people were watching now. Phones glowed openly from porches. Curtains no longer hid faces. The performance had stopped working. "You think these people care about you?" Reeves muttered toward Naomi. "Tomorrow they will forget this even happened." Naomi shook her head slowly. "Maybe, but they will remember how you made them feel standing here tonight." For the first time since the patrol car arrived, Reeves seemed unsure what to say next. Across the street, Rex gave one low, controlled growl deep in his chest. Not aggressive. Warning. Marcus' eyes narrowed slightly as he studied the officer with quiet precision. Then he spoke for the first time in nearly a minute. "Officer," he said calmly, "take your hand away from that taser before this situation becomes something you cannot explain later." Officer Reeves immediately pulled his hand away from the taser at his side, but the damage was already done. The movement had been small, almost instinctive, yet everybody on Linden Street had seen it. The neighbors on their porches. The people recording through rain-speckled phone screens. Naomi standing soaked beside her groceries. And Rex. Especially Rex. The German Shepherd remained perfectly planted beside Marcus Kane, muscles tense beneath the tactical harness, dark eyes fixed on the officer with military precision. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not move closer. Somehow that made the moment heavier. "Easy, Rex," he said quietly. The dog obeyed instantly, though his attention never drifted. Reeves looked furious now, but beneath the anger Naomi saw something else creeping in. Embarrassment. The kind that appeared when someone realized control was slipping away in public. "You think you know police procedure?" Reeves snapped. Marcus kept his hands visible at his sides. "I know escalation patterns." Rainwater slid down the scar near his jaw while the streetlights reflected dimly off the dog tags hanging against his chest. "And I know your body language changed the second she challenged your authority." Reeves scoffed loudly, but his eyes darted briefly toward the glowing phones around the block. "This is exactly what is wrong nowadays," he muttered. "Everybody thinks they are an expert because they watched videos online." "No," Marcus replied calmly. "I spent 11 years handling combat situations overseas. I learned what tension looks like before people act on it." The words settled across the street with cold finality. Naomi saw several neighbors exchange glances from their porches. Reeves noticed it too. The balance of the situation had shifted without anyone touching each other. Evelyn Brooks slowly descended one step from the porch despite the rain, clutching her cardigan tightly around herself. "Officer," she said softly, her voice trembling with age and exhaustion, "my daughter has lived on this street her whole life. Please just let her come inside." Reeves rubbed rainwater from his forehead, visibly irritated now by the attention surrounding him. "Ma'am, nobody is stopping her." Naomi looked at him in disbelief. "You stopped me the second you assumed I did not belong here." Reeves opened his mouth to answer, but Marcus spoke first. "That is the part you are missing." The officer turned sharply toward him. Marcus nodded toward the scattered groceries still sitting in puddles beneath the flashing patrol lights. She was carrying soup and insulin into her mother's house during a storm. Yet somehow your first instinct was suspicion. Silence again. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Somewhere farther down the block, thunder rolled low across the city skyline. Naomi suddenly became aware of how cold she was. Her scrubs clung to her skin. Her fingers ached from gripping wet plastic grocery bags too long. But beneath the exhaustion, something steadier had started to rise inside her. Not anger. Dignity. The simple refusal to shrink anymore. Reeves looked around the neighborhood once more, realizing there was no clean way to regain control now. Too many witnesses. Too many cameras. Too much truth hanging openly in the rain. Then his radio crackled sharply against his shoulder. "Unit 12, status check." Reeves grabbed the radio almost too quickly. "Situation is handled," he answered tightly. Marcus tilted his head slightly at the wording. "Situation." As if Naomi herself had been the disturbance. Rex suddenly stepped half a pace forward beside Marcus, ears rigid again. Marcus looked directly at Reeves and spoke in the same calm, measured tone that had unsettled the officer from the beginning. "You know what your problem is?" Reeves stared back coldly. Marcus nodded toward Naomi. "You saw a black woman standing in the rain outside her own home and still assumed she needed permission to belong there." The street went completely silent. Even the rain seemed quieter after that. The silence after Marcus Kane's words lingered over Linden Street like fog after a storm. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Rainwater dripped steadily from porch roofs and power lines, while the flashing patrol lights painted the wet pavement in broken streaks of red and blue. Naomi stood motionless beside the ruined groceries, breathing slowly through the ache in her chest. For the first time that night, Officer Reeves looked smaller somehow. Not physically, morally. The certainty he carried when he first stepped out of the patrol car had started to crack under the weight of too many watching eyes. Reeves glanced down the street, as if searching for support that was no longer there. The phone's recording him openly now. The neighbors no longer pretending not to notice. The elderly woman standing under a porch light waiting for her daughter to come home safely. And Marcus beside the German shepherd, calm as stone beneath the rain. Rex sat quietly now, though his eyes never drifted far from the officer. The dog's wet fur shimmered dark beneath the streetlights while water gathered along the edge of his harness straps. Naomi found herself staring at the animal for a moment. There was something strangely grounding about the stillness he carried. No fear, no anger, just awareness. Marcus finally bent slowly at the waist and picked up the soaked bag of groceries nearest his boots. A carton of eggs rattled softly inside. He examined the cracked cardboard for a second before carefully setting it upright beneath the liquor store awning to keep it out of the rain. The simple gesture shifted something in Naomi unexpectedly. All night she had been treated like a problem to manage. Marcus treated her belongings like they mattered. Like she mattered. Evelyn wiped moisture from beneath her eyes with trembling fingers. Naomi hated seeing her mother worried like this. After years of hospital visits, medication schedules, and long overnight shifts, all she ever wanted was to protect the little piece her mother still had left. Instead, that piece had been dragged into the street beneath flashing police lights. "Mama," Naomi called gently. "Go inside before you catch cold." Evelyn shook her head immediately. "Not without you." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Reeves shifted uncomfortably, hearing the emotion in it too. The rain softened little by little until it became a quiet drizzle tapping softly against parked cars. Somewhere nearby, wind rustled through the old maple trees lining the sidewalk. The neighborhood slowly exhaled tension one breath at a time. Marcus looked toward Naomi again. "You should get her medicine inside." Reeves opened his mouth like he wanted to interrupt, but nothing came out. The authority in the moment no longer belonged to him. Naomi bent carefully and gathered the remaining groceries from the pavement. Her hands still trembled slightly from the cold, but her posture had changed. Straighter now, steadier. She no longer looked like someone waiting for permission. Marcus stepped forward just enough to hand her the rescued grocery bag from beneath the awning. Up close, Naomi noticed how tired his eyes looked beneath the hood. Not weak, just worn in the quiet way soldiers often carried themselves after too many years surviving tension. "Thank you," she said softly. Marcus gave a small nod. "You did not need me out here tonight." Naomi looked down briefly at the cracked carton of eggs in her hands. "Maybe not," she admitted. "But I think the street did." Somewhere behind them, a screen door opened slowly. Then another. One by one, neighbors stepped onto their porches without hiding anymore. Not loud, not dramatic, just present, watching, witnessing. And under the fading glow of patrol lights, Officer Reeves suddenly looked like the only person on Linden Street, standing completely alone. Officer Reeves stood beneath the fading wash of his patrol lights with rain dripping from the edge of his sleeves, while the entire street watched him in silence. Naomi could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes now. The confidence he arrived with was gone. In its place sat the uncomfortable realization that this moment had become larger than a routine stop. Marcus Kane adjusted the strap on Rex's harness slightly before reaching into the inside pocket of his weathered canvas jacket. Reeves immediately stiffened again, but Marcus moved slowly, deliberately, pulling out nothing more than a small black device no larger than a deck of cards. "Body camera," he said calmly before the officer could react. Reeves' face changed instantly. Marcus held the device low in his palm, rainwater beating across its scratched surface beneath the streetlights. "The entire interaction has been recording since you stepped out of your vehicle." Nobody on Linden Street made a sound. Naomi felt her pulse slow for the first time all night. Reeves stared at the camera, jaw tightening hard. You recorded me without consent? Marcus tilted his head slightly. We are standing on a public street. The officer's eyes narrowed. Who are you exactly? Marcus looked toward Rex for half a second before answering. Retired Navy SEAL. Military K-9 handler. Tactical de-escalation instructor after discharge. The words landed with quiet weight. Naomi noticed several neighbors exchange stunned looks from their porches. Reeves glanced at the German Shepherd again, suddenly seeing the animal differently now. Not just a dog. A trained observer. A partner. Marcus continued speaking in the same calm, measured voice. Rex was trained to detect changes in body posture, elevated stress behavior, and threat escalation. Reeves scoffed weakly. It is a dog. It is a combat-tested dog, Marcus corrected softly. And he reacted the second your hand moved toward that taser. The rain had almost stopped now, leaving only soft drops falling from tree branches overhead. Somewhere down the block, thunder faded deeper into the city skyline. Naomi looked at Marcus carefully, realizing this man had not intervened because he wanted attention. He intervened because he recognized danger long before anyone else admitted it existed. Reeves shifted uncomfortably beneath the watching eyes around him. You are twisting this entire situation. Marcus shook his head once. No, I am describing it exactly the way it happened. Then he looked toward Naomi standing there in soaked hospital scrubs holding groceries against her chest. A black nurse came home after a 14-hour shift and was treated like a suspect in front of her sick mother and neighbors. Reeves opened his mouth again, but Marcus spoke over him for the first time that night. Not loudly, just firmly. And you kept escalating after she cooperated. The words struck harder because they were true. Naomi saw it hit the officer in real time. Truth had a different weight when spoken plainly in front of witnesses. One of the neighbors stepped farther onto his porch holding up his phone openly now. I got the whole thing too, the man called out. Then another voice from farther down the block answered. Same here. Reeves turned slowly, realizing how many cameras surrounded him now. Not angry crowds. Not chaos. Just ordinary people quietly refusing to look away anymore. Evelyn Brooks stood near the porch steps with tears still glistening in her eyes. But there was pride there too now. Quiet pride. Naomi suddenly felt exhausted in a completely different way. The adrenaline draining from her body all at once. Marcus looked back toward the officer one final time. You still have a chance to end tonight the right way, he said calmly. But that window is closing. Reeves stared at him through the damp glow of patrol lights, breathing slowly, saying nothing at all. Officer Reeves looked down at the rain-slick pavement for a long moment before finally exhaling through his nose. The tension that had wrapped around Linden Street all night was beginning to loosen, thread by thread. His shoulders dropped slightly beneath the wet uniform. The flashing patrol lights continued spinning across windows and parked cars, but now they felt less like authority and more like exposure. Naomi stood silently beside her mother, groceries gathered carefully in her arms. She was exhausted down to the bone, yet somehow steadier than she had been at the start of the night. Marcus Kane remained near the curb with Rex sitting calmly beside him, both of them motionless beneath the fading drizzle. Reeves looked toward the phones recording him from nearby porches, then toward the small black body camera resting in Marcus' hand. He understood now that there would be no rewriting this moment later. No simplified report. Too many witnesses. Too much truth. Finally, he turned toward Naomi. His voice came out lower this time. Smaller. Ma'am, he said carefully. You are free to go inside. Naomi stared at him without answering immediately. The words should have sounded reasonable, but after everything that happened, they landed strangely hollow. Free to go inside her own house. Evelyn Brooks looked between them with tired eyes while cold wind pushed softly through the trees overhead. Reeves swallowed once before speaking again. I should not have approached the situation the way I did. The neighborhood stayed quiet. Nobody celebrated. Nobody shouted. The silence itself held him accountable. Naomi shifted the grocery bags slightly against her chest. One corner of the bread package had collapsed from the rain. The carton of eggs Marcus saved earlier rested cracked, but intact against her forearm. Small damaged things still worth carrying home. She looked directly at Reeves. Do you know what the hardest part is? She asked quietly. Reeves said nothing. Naomi glanced down the street lined with brick row houses and glowing porch lights. It is not even moments like this anymore. Her voice stayed calm, but every word carried weight. It is how normal they start to feel after a while. Reeves lowered his eyes briefly. Marcus watched him carefully, but remained silent. Naomi continued softly. People should not have to prove they belong in the neighborhoods they grew up in. The wind stirred water from the tree branches overhead, scattering droplets across the sidewalk like soft applause from the storm itself. Reeves rubbed one hand across the back of his neck, visibly uncomfortable now in a way Naomi suspected he rarely allowed himself to feel. "I was responding to a call," he muttered weakly. Marcus finally spoke again. "Calls tell you where to go," he said evenly. "Character decides how you treat people when you get there." Reeves looked at him, then toward Rex sitting alert beneath the streetlight. The German shepherd no longer appeared tense, just watchful, calm. The danger had passed. Naomi slowly handed one grocery bag toward her mother before speaking again. "I do not want revenge, officer." That finally made Reeves look up fully. Naomi's expression held no hatred, only exhaustion and truth. "I just want people on this street to feel protected instead of afraid every time patrol lights show up." Somewhere nearby, a porch screen creaked softly as another neighbor stepped outside into the cooling night air. Reeves looked around the block one last time, seeing the faces differently now. Not threats, not suspicious people. Families, elderly residents, children peeking from behind curtains. Ordinary lives interrupted by fear too often. He gave a slow nod, though shame still lingered visibly across his face. "Understood," he said quietly. Marcus clipped the body camera back inside his jacket without another word. The statement was enough. For now. Then Reeves stepped backward toward his patrol car, the wet pavement reflecting red and blue light beneath his boots, while Linden Street watched him leave his pride behind one careful step at a time. The patrol car finally pulled away from Linden Street with its lights no longer flashing, only the soft glow of red tail lamps disappearing slowly into the wet Baltimore night. Nobody spoke for several seconds after it was gone. The neighborhood remained still beneath the damp shimmer of streetlights and rain-dark sidewalks, as if the entire block needed a moment to remember how to breathe normally again. Naomi stood quietly near the curb, holding the last grocery bag against her chest, while cool wind brushed gently through her soaked braids. Her scrubs clung heavy against her skin, carrying the smell of rain, hospital disinfectant, and exhaustion. Yet beneath all of it, something lighter had finally returned to her posture. Not victory, peace, the kind that arrived slowly after surviving something humiliating without losing yourself in the process. One by one, neighbors began retreating back inside their homes. Porch doors closed softly. Curtains drifted shut. A few people offered Naomi small nods before disappearing into warm kitchens and living rooms glowing gold against the darkness outside. No speeches, no applause, just quiet understanding. Evelyn Brooks stepped carefully down the final porch step and wrapped one arm gently around her daughter's shoulders. "Come inside, baby," she whispered. Naomi closed her eyes briefly at the sound of her mother's voice. She had spent years taking care of everybody else. Patients, doctors, family, strangers bleeding on emergency room floors. Tonight reminded her how rarely someone stood still long enough to protect her. "I am okay now, Mama," she said softly, though her voice almost broke on the last word. Evelyn squeezed her arm tighter. "I know." Across the street, Marcus Kane clipped Rex's leash back onto the harness with practiced hands. The German shepherd shook rainwater from his coat before sitting calmly beside him once more. Under the dim streetlight, the dog no longer looked tense or alert, just tired, like his handler. Naomi looked toward them both. "Marcus." He glanced up. "Yeah." She hesitated for a moment, searching for words big enough to hold what the night had meant. None felt right. Finally, she simply said, "Thank you for seeing me." Marcus studied her quietly beneath the glow of the liquor store awning. Then he gave a small nod. People deserve to be seen where they live. The simplicity of the answer settled deeply inside her. Rex walked slowly toward Naomi then, stopping gently beside her without a sound. Up close, his dark eyes looked calm and intelligent beneath the streetlight reflections. Naomi carefully lowered one hand to the side of his neck. Warm fur, steady breathing, trust earned through discipline instead of fear. The dog leaned lightly into her touch for half a second before sitting beside her on the wet sidewalk. Marcus smiled faintly at the sight. He only does that with people he respects. Naomi let out the first soft laugh she had made all night. Small, tired, real. Somewhere above them, clouds finally began breaking apart, revealing thin pieces of moonlight between the rooftops. Water dripped steadily from tree branches while the storm moved farther across the city. Marcus adjusted the hood on his jacket and looked down the quiet block one final time. "Looks different now," he murmured. Naomi followed his gaze. Linden Street did feel different. Not because the houses changed, not because the rain stopped, but because for one night, people refused to look away from each other. Evelyn opened the front door, warm yellow lights spilling across the porch steps and onto the wet pavement. Naomi gathered the groceries carefully in her arms again. Before stepping inside, she turned back once more. Marcus stood beneath the streetlight with Rex sitting beside him, both silhouettes calm against the fading mist. No sirens, no shouting, just the quiet sound of water dripping from rooftops and a neighborhood finally settling back into peace. Then Naomi walked into the house, and the door closed softly behind her while the street outside breathed in silence once again.